Hey everybody, Nev here, and I think I owe you a video or two. I kind of promised that I was going to do some videos live on Facebook every Friday, and then things got kind of busy slash interesting, but I don't like giving excuses. So what I decided to do is this whole week we've been doing sort of real estate around the world, and I found this really cool video from Real Vision, which you can find YouTube channel that really talks about the real estate, and it touches on two cities that I talked about, Vancouver and Seattle. And so I thought it was a really cool video. There's a lot of stuff that they're talking about, and I wanted to do a share what I have found and then also provide commentary. So I've actually chopped the video a little bit, took out some pieces, but you're absolutely welcome to go look for Real Vision channel on YouTube and be able to watch this video in full. I honestly chopped it just to shorten the video and hopefully entice you to watch the whole thing because it is really, really important and there's a lot of really cool information. So I'm going to stop yapping. I'm going to go right onto the video and then I'm going to come back with some commentaries on things that are sort of throwing red flags for me. Fair? All right, let's go watch.
If you take a look at something like a Case-Shiller index for any city in North America, basically, the prices are approaching, in some cases exceeding, the levels reached during 06-07 when the whole world was in a bubble. I'm here on the ground to look into the individual transactions that are driving this market. Who are the buyers? Who are the sellers? What are they thinking? What are their motivations? What kind of expectations do they have?
So we're basically about 10 minutes outside of downtown Vancouver. So this is considered like a wealthier neighborhood, a little bit bigger lot. It's called the Shaughnessy area of Vancouver. This is about a 10,000 square foot lot, which is considered quite large for Vancouver. So this house sold in 2014 for $5 million in January. And then later that year in 2014 in November, it sold for 5.5 million. 2015 it sold for 6.5, and then in 2016 it sold for 7.6. So you can see each year basically went up like $1 million without doing anything because each owner left it empty. They didn't do any renovations to it. It's basically like they held it for a year and sold it.
What does a new construction home on this street sell for? Like if you actually tore this down and built a beautiful home here?
You could probably get like 8 or 9 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Depending on
who's living in that?
That's usually like what we, a lot of the times you see is, we call it sort of like satellite or astronaut families where it's like a mom and like a daughter or son that are going to school here, and the dad usually lives overseas in China. As we really got into like the end of 2015, early 2016, we were seeing 10 offers. We were seeing some single family homes getting $1 million over the asking price. So I think that was when it was just like, okay, like something's really going on.
Something's up. Were you, these circumstances back then where you had this crazy bidding and the prices going up, were you representing clients who were trying to purchase these properties and just got, priced out of the game because they weren't being aggressive enough?
Yeah, definitely. Had some families, that had sold, basically waited sort of 6 months to see how the market would shape up, and then just like that, prices shot up 20% in those 6 months, and just like that, they were priced out, and still today trying to get back in.
All right, man. So tell me, what are we looking at here?
It's just a under construction building. Had some clients that bought into it as a pre-sale, and then they flip it as like a assignment contract. That's what it's called.
And what does that mean when you say like they bought into it as a pre-sale? These are individual units or this whole development?
So they basically bought like a unit in this development. You usually pre-sell these about 2 to 3 years out. It's basically to finance the project.
I see. So the developer does a pre-sale prior to the construction being finished?
Yeah.
And then you're saying that there are people who are then selling those once again prior to the building being done?
Yeah, so prior, basically what happens a lot of times is we see like people buy into these pre-sales and then they don't really have any intention of like living in them or really owning them. Basically they buy in with the developer and then they wait for the market to go up, and then over the 1 to 2 to 3 years, and they flip that contract to another buyer before the construction's complete.
I see. And are they making money? Like, they're making a big return on this?
Yeah, so my client bought in, that was like a 3-bedroom a couple years ago for like $1 million. And then they recently just flipped it for about 1.5.
Wow.
All right. So you watched the clip where he talks about these contracts pre-build, and a lot of times developers will actually do that. They will pre-sell, use the money from pre-sale to actually build the deliverable product, and then upon the completion of it, you get the property. What he's talking about here is really getting a contract with the right to assign. And so while, yes, he's talking about that he has a client that has made money, this can be very, very risky proposition if this is a strategy, because if the market ever stops, slows down, or turns down, you actually end up being on the hook for all of the money. Typically, then we end up seeing, when people call it underwater, this is kind of how that ends up happening. You buy above the value, and as long as the market goes up, you're safe. But whenever market potentially stops or turns down, that is when problems ensue. And so that is really the red flag that I'm watching and that I'm seeing and hearing when I'm watching this video. Let's continue.
So,
And when you buy in the pre-sale, do you have to actually consummate the transaction and get a loan and do all that, or are you just putting a deposit down?
yes, you have to put down, generally what they do now is about 20, it used to be about 15%, now they've upped it to about 25%. So you put down basically a 25% deposit over like a 1-year period, and then you basically have another 2 years to get your financing in order and all that stuff.
I see. So in the case like the example you gave me, somebody could literally put in $250,000 and walk away, with $600,000 or $700,000.
Yeah, exactly. Basically just you put down a little bit of money. It's like, it's probably the most lucrative speculative play. Like if you're gonna like bet on our housing market, like this has been the area to do it.
That's amazing.
Because you really don't even have to be like fully qualified, right? Like you can just, as long as you can scrounge that money together and let the market do its work.
How prevalent is that around in these developments? Does it happen in every one of them?
Yeah, pretty much everyone now. I would say it's become more acute over the last couple of years, particularly just because people have seen like how much money these people are making in these pre-sale markets.
Yeah.
And they think the market's just going to keep going up, right? So like, well, let me put down this 20% and let the market do its thing.
So as you can see, he's even talking about that people then end up watching and seeing what's happening and what's been going on. So they start jumping in. The problem typically with markets, not just with real estate, but with any financial market, with any security whatsoever, any investment, is that typically when people starts in mass jumping in and you start seeing something as crazy as 20% rise in prices in a very short period of time, that looks bubblicious to me. And so that is the time where it gets very, very dangerous. And that is the time where I personally don't like to jump in, and I don't like to invest in those moments. And I never recommend to my students, my friends, and my family to do that either. So if you decide to do that, that is obviously your own decision. However, for me, as I have mentioned previously, if you have watched or heard me speak anywhere, I am very risk averse. I don't like to gamble with my money. I prefer safe, secure deals that still provide great returns without a lot of risk. And just watching and listening to this, there's a lot of risk out there, and I'm not a fan.
What happens to you if you're the person who buys the pre-sale? Let's say you bought the first one for $900,000, and then you assigned it to somebody for $1.2 million a year later, and then they don't close.
Yeah.
Is the original person still liable to consummate the transaction?
Yeah, and that's like one of the things that I'm sort of concerned about is basically the original purchaser is on the hook, right? So if that person flipped it to someone, and the person who bought the flip, say, then flips it to someone else, and one of those people down the line doesn't close the developer, it actually originally comes back to that first purchaser.
Wow.
Okay, so with these sort of contract flips, you've already heard him talk about that when you get into this deal, you can flip it and even potentially make money. And yes, they'll pay you. But if they don't close, the original person. So if you decide that you are that original person, if somebody down the line, 5, 10, 15 people, how many ever ends up happening, doesn't close on the deal, you're the original person on the hook. And so now, even if you thought you're out of it, if somebody doesn't end up going through with it, you potentially will have to figure out how to pay for that, figure out the financing, or potentially go through bankruptcy if you don't have money. If for whatever reason the prices actually end up going down, you would be liable for the amount of money that you have agreed on the contract. So reading the contract and understanding exactly what your obligations and liabilities are before you do anything is crucial to success. Most people know that, but I also know that common sense is not always common practice, as Brendan Richard says. So I'm going to quote him here because it is such a great statement, and it's absolutely true.
I started off in real estate about 14 years ago, and then since then I've been acting as the Senior Development Manager for Bucci Developments, who's a local Canadian developer who develops in Vancouver and also in Calgary.
So what's your take on this market?
I think it's a really interesting market. There is long delay in product supply, which is causing constraints, which is resulting in the increased demand. Multifamily projects that are coming to market still have people lining up outside. You're seeing projects launch where there's 200 or 300 units and they're selling still at record pricing, and they'll sell out in 2 or 3 days. At the end of the day, whether you're looking for a condominium, a townhome, or a single-family home, I think the condos are still very, very hot. In the last year to a year and a half, they've generally appreciated in Metro Vancouver about 20 to 40%, just depending on where they are, which neighborhood, which location. The townhomes have appreciated probably anywhere between 10 to 30% in the last year.
When you think about a condo in Vancouver, would you rather be a buyer or seller in this market?
I think that I'd prefer to be a seller, and the main reason being is because the price point at which you can sell a condo at and the level of demand. My understanding is that most condos that are selling at a given price point are receiving maybe 10 to 15 offers, if not more, just because there's such a demand for condominium housing right now. So yeah, I would much rather be a seller right now than a buyer who's struggling to find a place at a price point that works.
Okay, so an interesting concept that the gentleman is talking about with condos is very prevalent in the top markets, and here's why. Houses, single-family homes end up costing way too much money, and condos end up being a whole lot more affordable, so to speak. Even though the prices are still crazy, they end up being a bit more affordable. Now, one thing that I see as a positive to a degree, because I still don't know the reasons why people are jumping in, is that people are lining up and these condos are selling like crazy. That just watching that, listening to that reminds me of living in Atlanta, Georgia in 2005. Condos were all the rage at that time, and people were jumping in as quickly as possible, and you would have a condo list, and before it even hits the market, before there's an open house, the seller would receive 10, 20, 50, 10, 15, 20 offers on the purchase price that is well above the value, and people were bidding things up, and it would sell before open house. So when I see those things, there's something there that makes me question and makes me want to learn why and what's happening. Sometimes truly there's a desire and need for housing, and that's why people are doing it. But oftentimes there's this mania of sorts where people start jumping in because they don't want to miss out. And so when that ends up happening, that's the part where we see this bubbles, where we see this, they will call it frothy often, but it just means that it's bubble and it's just sort of like rising to the top, and we're reaching the peak, so to speak. And typically when you start reaching the peak, well, the only other direction to go is down. And when everybody thinks that there's no way you can go down, that the only way is up, is the time where I get very, very nervous and I start pulling back. And I might not necessarily sell per se, but I am definitely not buying?
Yeah, so I wanted to bring you here because it's basically like the east side of Vancouver. It's more on the outskirts. It almost borders Burnaby, which is like the adjacent city. It's basically very family oriented. You get a lot of renters. Like none of these houses are going to be like vacant. So this is more so like, yeah, what you typically find for people that are just here working hard and trying to afford like a single family home.
I see. And what would something like this sell for in today's market?
I mean, they have this one listed at like 1.3 million. So it's like it's a smaller lot.
What are the stats on this one? Like how big is it?
Yeah, it's a 3,500 square foot lot. This one's kind of unique because the house is only 650 square feet, but it's like a 3-bedroom.
Wow.
So I don't really know how they make that work, but basically I think what's going to happen is someone will come in here, they'll buy it, and they'll plan to tear it down and build something new. But basically the way I look at it is like the lot value for something like this is really about 1.1 million.
Okay, so here's the crazy piece. You just got to see the property and you just heard that it's 650 square feet, but it's a 3-bedroom. Now, I don't know if you know how big or small 650 square feet is, but I don't know how big or small these bedrooms are. They have to be absolutely tiny because remember, it's not just the bedrooms. You got to fit the kitchen. You got to put the living room somewhere. You got to put the bathroom somewhere. So this is very questionable what's happening. The other piece that is sort of a red flag for me and just listening to this is that it's almost a $1.5 million property, but it's a tear down. They're buying it for the land value so that they can actually build something. And what you will see and hear very shortly is that what he thinks is this is going to be a homeowner who's going to end up purchasing this. This to me really signals the top in the market. And one thing I do want to remind, even though it's on the video, some of you might miss it. This was recorded well over a year ago. I'm doing this in 2019, in November of 2019. This was recorded in March of 2018. Since then, Vancouver prices actually have dropped down. And I am really not beating up on Vancouver. I'm just using this story to point out some key things that when I go out there in the market, when I start researching, what are the things that I listen to, what are the things that I am watching, so that I want to share those things with you because I believe that potentially can help you as you go out there, especially if you've never done something like this, to be able to pay attention to what are the things that you actually should be watching for and listening for.
And again, it's on the outskirts of Vancouver. Like we have a very noisy, busy highway behind us.
And is this common, like to see a property of this size and scale in this neighborhood selling for over $1 million as a teardown?
Yeah, this is like completely normal. Like the typical teardown around here is like $1.2 million. Because this is a little bit smaller lot, closer to that busy highway, I see it around 1.1.
I see. And what's in it for the group or the individual buying this and doing the teardown development? Like, are they going to make money on the transaction? Are they going to be able to build something and flip it? Are they going to live in it? What is the most likely thing to happen here?
I don't see it as like a speculative play. I see this more as like a family looking to sort of set its roots and live here for the next, 5, 8, 10 years. And really raise a family, because this is like one of those more affordable areas where if you're trying to buy a single family home, like this is kind of where you're going to get your feet into the market, so to speak.
And what about like the house? Like, let's say you were able to build a 2,500 square foot house here. What would that rent for?
The full house?
Yeah.
You'd probably get on the high side, maybe $4,000 if it's a newer home.
I see.
Yeah.
And so like if you looked at the mortgage cost, so your estimate was what, like it was going to be worth roughly 1.5, 1.6 if it was finished?
Yeah, I think the time you buy the lot for around 1.1, throw in a new house on there, yeah, you're probably looking at least 1.5, 1.6. So.
And so $4,000 a month is not going to cover the mortgage.
Yeah,
probably.
No, definitely not.
And these all have basements and stuff, and so on this neighborhood?
Yeah, it's almost all basement suites, just to support that mortgage. But as like an investor, it's usually you're looking at it as like a long-term play, being like, okay, I'm probably going to lose money on this every single month, but the value of the land is going to keep going up, so that's where I'll make my money.
Okay, so you actually got to hear from the folks talking that, right, like when you tear it down and end up rebuilding, so it's going to cost about 1.5, 1.6 million. And part of it that is really alarming and heartbreaking for me is watching and listening to understand that $1.5 million is the affordable area. I don't know in what part of the world and how much money one needs to earn to be able to buy a $1.5 million property that is affordable. The problem is that, you've heard it, that rental will not support it. $4,000 for $1.5 million mortgage, you're not going to cover the mortgage, nonetheless, the other cost of ownership. So it doesn't make sense in that regard. And then finally, what the realtor was talking about is that a lot of folks, when they're going to invest, they're going to go and invest it in the hopes that the prices are going to go up. That is, again, very, very highly risky proposition. And, I agree with Robert Kiyosaki that the true evaluation whether something is a good investment or not, it has to have cash flow. It has to make money from day one. If it doesn't, it's a bad investment, it's a bad deal, and I do not recommend going in and buying it. Potentially could turn things around, potentially prices could go up, but I always like to look at the downside. And one of my greatest mentors ever always says, always, always, always protect the downside, and upside will take care of itself. When people are going in, they're gambling, hoping that the prices will go up so that they can make money that way. Meanwhile, they're losing. And so they're buying a house thinking that it's an asset. Meanwhile, it's a huge liability with a giant risk attached to it. And so I wanted to use this story, use this video as a moment of showcasing things of what I look for and sort of do and don't. I hope this was really helpful. In the next video, we're going to tackle down Seattle, Washington. But for now, this is it. So I hope you're doing well. Enjoy your evening. And until next time, stay forever money blessed. And do remember, you are only one deal away.